Hey there, Drawyah here, and welcome to Microsoft Flight Simulator. In this video, we shall be going through a tutorial setup of the Boeing 747-8 Intercontinental, going through its entire cold and dark process from FMS Config, pushback and engine starts, taxi, and takeoff. We shall also be using SimBrief for our management computer setup, and therefore, if you don't know what that is, or don't have a flight plan ready to follow along, I'd highly recommend you watch the video in the top right corner of the screen first, where I go through a flight plan setup. Now, without further ado, let's jump up into the cockpit and let's start preparing this flight. First thing you want to do is head to the overhead panel, set the standby power to automatic, and turn the battery on. With that now running, you can then go to the Acceler powers 1 and 2 and bring the aircraft systems to life. We can now head down to the FMS, and it's here we'll start programming our flights for today. So the first thing we'll do is go over to the position initialization and plug in our current airport, which is Echo Golf Lima Lima, London Heathrow Airport. Paste that in, copy the current location and paste it into the IRS position. We'll then head over to the route page and start plugging in our flight plan. When it comes to a flight plan, there are two nodes that need to be aware of: waypoints and airways. A waypoint is a set coordinates that the airplane will be flying towards, and that is based on the VOR tower location. And so, what the airplane will do is daisy chain from one VOR tower to the other, so fly VOR to VOR, until you reach your destination. An airway is an aircraft right-of-way, and so what that will do is determine the specific routes that the aircraft will take when flying between two waypoints. And so that takes into account any airspace regulations, traffic patterns, all of those, and just kind of guides the airplane around those when flying VOR to VOR. So, first things first, we'll plug in our departure airport, which is Heathrow, Echo Golf Lima Lima, and our arrival airport, which is Helsinki Vantaa at Echo Foxtrot Hotel Kilo. We'll then head over to the next page and start plugging our waypoints for today, starting off with Bravo Papa Kilo. That's in. As you can see, we have got a multiple choice here of Bravo Papa Kilo waypoints, and well, you can either use SimBrief to determine which one's the correct one, or in this case, it's quite an easy guess because we're currently flying in London, so we're currently in the northern hemisphere, not the southern hemisphere, and therefore, with the first one and last one being exactly the same, either one of those will work no problem. After Bravo Papa Kilo, then fly Quebec 295. Pass that into the via point, although nothing's happened. However, it hasn't thrown back an error message, so we do know that the waypoint, the airway does exist, and therefore it should be fine when we start plugging the rest of the route in. And our next waypoint is Somva. After Somva, we then fly up 155. Now, this time, it has given us an error message. So when we plug that in, Quebec 295, there's no error message, but it has now appeared. In this case, up 155 does not exist. And so when it comes to the AIRAC cycle in Flight Simulator, the waypoints, they work fine. I've not really seen any of them missing. You can fly VOR to VOR without any problems whatsoever. There are a few airways missing here and there, but again, it's not a terrible data space, and you can fly between these routings without too much of a problem. So, you're not going to have any issue whatsoever when it comes to FMS setup. After Somva, we then fly to Mavas. And as you can see, we now have a DCT. That's short for direct. So there's no airway, we fly direct to Tuska. After Tuska, it's another direct point to Ruip. Now that we're out of space on the first page, click on the next page button and continue the rest of the flight plan, flying November 851. Once again, not in database, so we just clear that. Instead fly direct to Lakats. Just like that, our flight plan is now complete. We'll activate that, execute it, go to the next page and check our flight plan on the ND there, navigation display. So switch over to plan mode. If we zoom out, you now see the magenta line out of Heathrow. If we go via step mode, watch the flight plan as it continues all the way to Helsinki. So you can see there's no brakes, it's a nice and straight flight plan, and therefore we can run it as that. Next, we then head over to the departure page and start setting up our SID out of Heathrow, our standard instrument departure. And so what a SID does is it's a preset route that goes out of different runways of different airports and sends aircraft to their first initial waypoint. And so the routings allow aircraft to be spaced out and also avoid one another, as well as avoid incoming traffic for landing, and therefore it's just a automatic routing that makes airspace management a lot easier when departing in and out of airports. So set up departure for runway 27 right, and our SID shall be the Bravo Papa Kilo 7 Foxtrot. Happy with both of those, we can go back to the route, activate that and execute. If you have a look at the ND now and zoom in, a bunch of new waypoints have just appeared. And so we make a right hand turn, it's a bit of a shallower departure route, avoids all the incoming traffic, and then eventually sends us to our first waypoint of Bravo Kilo. So, also happy with that. Then back to the FMS and set up one last thing, which is the performance initialization. Today we'll be cruising at 350, so we plug that into the FMS, 350 being 35,000 feet. Cost units, however, in the 747 at this stage is not yet functional, but it would be 29. Just plug it in there, and that would fill in the cost index of your flight today. Once you've done that, you can execute. Click on the thrust limiter, click on takeoff, and here you'll now see your takeoff set up for the 747. So on the right, you've got your takeoff speeds, say departing at 211 knots. Now flaps will be set to 10 degrees. You can change this if you wanted to, but we're using standard 10 degrees of flaps since, well, Heathrow's got long runways, but the 747 is also a very big and heavy jet. We shall set the airspeed now to match that with the takeoff, so 211. Set our cruising altitude to 35,000 feet. Flight director comes on, and head over to the overhead panel. We can now start up the APU and prepare the aircraft for engine start. What we're going to do now is turn on the auxiliary power units, the APU. So switch it on and push and hold the start switch for a few seconds to allow the starter motor to kick the engine into life. If we head outside, we can now hear the APU starting at the back of the aeroplane. So what that does is it runs a small engine in the back of the aeroplane to run the electrical systems within the aircraft without the need for a ground power unit. So what we'll do is make ourselves independent of the ground before starting our engines ready for start. So we'll give that a few seconds to warm up. The AP generators are now available, so you press on both of those. Cell power disconnects, and we are now independent of all ground systems. We should also turn on the navigation lights, and we probably should have done earlier, just to alert that we are an active aircraft. And we'll also turn the beacon lights on, both, to alert ground crews that we are now getting ready for engine startup. So with the beacon lights on, ground crews will now clear the area around the aircraft, and also move to a safe distance, ready for engine start. We'll turn the fuel pumps on, you'll pull back the engine starter, and then on the throttle over there, you have 4 switches down below which control the fuel. And so as soon as the N1 hits 0.2, we can then flick the switch forward and turn the engine on. So let's call the pushback tug. That will slowly move into position. And what we're waiting for is a small tug on the nose wheel there. So that'll be the pushback tug applying pressure to the nose, which means we can then turn off the parking brake and start the engine process. In the 747 with 4 engines, you're starting the engines right to left. So 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. So just wait for that jolt now. There we go. Parking brake released. Overhead panel. Fuel pumps active. Engine 4 starter pulled. I'm going to watch that N1. And so it's 0.2. Start the fuel flow. Engine number 4 should start. We'll also use the ATC menu to request the aircraft to steer to the right. So using the ATC menu to request pushback takes a little bit of learning, takes a little bit of adjusting. But eventually, once you've done it enough, you'll start to learn when to do it, how to do it at a decent rate. So in this occasion, we're a little bit short, but we should still be able to taxi without too much of a problem. Engine number 4 has now started. And so what we're waiting for is the starter switch to pop back in to the forward position. We'll end the pushback and set the parking brake. Engine 4 is now active. Engine 3 starter, we pull. Also set the engine 3 fuel pumps to active. Watch Gen 1. Start the fuel flow. And just like before, engine number 3 will come to life. Go, engine's now coming to life. Back to the overhead. Wait for the starter to pop back into the off position. Engine 2 fuel pumps active. Engine 2 starts. Engine 2 fuel flow starts. And finally, when the starter switch pops back into the normal position, engine 1 fuel pumps on, engine 1 starter active, watch Gen 1, and the engine 1 fuel flow sets to run. So at this stage, all 4 engines are now starting or running. Set up the taxi configuration. So flaps down to 10 degrees. Wait for the engine starter to pop back into normal. We'll then shut off the APU, taxi lights on, and with taxi clearance we'll make ourselves over to the runway. Perfect. Now shut off the APU, flick that to the left. APU generators will automatically switch off. And turn the taxi lights to on. At this stage, we're now then able to increase the throttle, release the parking brake, and start taxiing over to the active runway for departure. To turn the aircraft, you can use the rudder or yaw axis. And in jet aircraft, that will also control the nose wheel gear, and therefore you can use that to adjust the aircraft back onto taxiway and continue over to the active runway for departure. As we approach the runway, we're going to want to hold short at the stop marker just on the ground there. And so the hold short point is used to maintain good separation between your aircraft and any aircraft that are currently on the runway, whether it's taking off or landing, just to maintain safe aircraft distance. So we'll hold short to the runway, bring the throttle back, and bring the aircraft to a halt. At this point, you'll now be getting air traffic control clearance for takeoff. I'm also doing a quick visual check of the runway to make sure that no airplanes are currently on approach. and make sure the aeroplanes are currently on the runway or coming in from the other side. As you can see, everything is clear, and therefore it is now safe for us to depart. So we shall increase our throttle. We'll set the landing lights to active, turning off the taxi lights. We shall also be turning on the strobe lights, as we will then be on the active runway, and therefore strobe lights is used for extra visual clarity for aircraft in the air. And you do need to bear in mind that with the 747, it is a big and heavy jet to taxi, and therefore does require a little bit of power to get the thing moving. Let's us align ourselves with the runway. Back the throttle. Sets the rejected takeoff brakes to active in the case of needing to stop the takeoff run for whatever reason. That's slow down. We'll push the throttle up to around 40%. Keep an eye on the N1s, make sure that they're all stable. If they are, throttle the aircraft up and prepare for departure. Knots. V1. Rotate. Check for positive climb, gear up, and on the Boeing aircraft, just to the right of the airspeed, you see a few numbers. And what that does is it tells you which flap settings you should be once you're at a certain speed. So we'll push the aircraft now down to about 10 degrees for climb, and we'll make a right-hand turn and start flying towards our first waypoint. So the 747 is a big and heavy jet, and so as well as on the ground running a little bit of power to get aircraft going, you do also need to give it some patience when picking up airspeed, as it will take its time to start getting up to 250 knots below 10,000. That's up to 5. Level the aircraft off. Up to 1 and flaps up entirely. At this stage now, we can also bring the aircraft onto autopilot and now the automated systems to sort out our climb. So, auto throttle is already armed. Autopilot we shall bring on, commands left, LNAV and VNAV active. At this stage, the aircraft now do all the work. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial on the 747 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and I hope you have found it helpful in learning how to start up the operations of this 4-engines jet. It's certainly a lot of fun to fly, and in my opinion probably one of the easiest aircrafts in the simulator right now to set up and fly. And so, if you found this tutorial helpful, please do consider giving the video a like. If you know anybody else who is also struggling with learning how to fly this aircraft, then I'd also highly recommend you share them this tutorial and help them in understanding how the aircraft works. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the very near future. Take care, and goodbye.